Welcome to Watercolours with Caroline. Today we're going to be painting a grain elevator in Saskatchewan, and I took the photo this time. It's not a great photo, but we're going to enhance it a little bit with some wheat fields and blue skies. So get your paper and your paints and let's get painting. So this is my very cheap paper here, and I want to go over the two skies for the landscape one, where the grain elevator is smaller, and you can either have that sky with sort of a pink hue at the bottom fading into a lovely cerulean sky. This is more difficult. Or you can go with just a blue cerulean blue sky with little clouds in it. And the other sky that I'm going to do is a much deeper blue sky, so that the white grain elevator stands out more against the deeper blue sky, more like a very high Saskatchewan summer, hot summer. This is more of a very light, cooler day. You can use any of these skies for any of the pictures that you have chosen to do. So I'm going to start with the easiest one. The easiest one is this one here with just the cerulean blue sky. You don't even have to put the clouds in if you feel that's too much for you at this point. So just watch, and then when I've finished doing these quick demos, then we'll do the actual painting. Just as soon as I find my paintbrushes, that's right, they just hid down there. So first one is a cerulean blue sky. And this is mostly for people who are just starting watercolor, a little bit nervous. And it's going to start with wetting everything except the grain elevator and the foreground. So I'm wetting everything that is going to be sky. And I don't need to be, I'm tucked up tight to my computer so you can see my face, and you don't need that. I can get closer to my painting. I know. So I'm being very careful when I go around my grain elevator. I'm being very careful to not go over the edge, because I don't want the paint to, and I don't want to turn it with the camera there, but normally I would turn this so that I can get a nice crisp line without having to put my arm over there, but I don't want to knock the camera over. So I just make sure all the sky is wet, and this is cheap paper, so it won't work as well as my cotton paper. And I want that to soak in for at least a minute. And I'm going to get some cerulean blue. Cerulean is Latin for sky blue, so it's a lovely, gentle, easy to lift blue. And I don't want it very wet, because my sky is already wet. If you put really wet paint on a very wet sky, you don't get anything happening at all. And I'm working with my number 8 brush at the moment. Now I'm going to start at the corner, so I get nice dark sky in the corner, and it goes much lighter as it dries. And I'm going to come across and leave some spaces where I want the clouds. And then I want to definitely have sky by my white grain elevator, or it won't show up. And because my paper's wet, I can work a little bit slower than I would normally, but not too slow, because you'd be surprised how quickly that paper starts to dry up. I don't want too many clouds in this sky. I just want a few. And some of you may say, no, I don't want any clouds in the sky. We're just going to have a lovely blue sky. Take that down to the grassy area. Now mine has started, because it's very cheap paper, mine has started to dry here. So I'm going to get a brush that's just a little bit wet. And I'm just going to dampen that area there where it started to dry. And that's the problem with cheap paper, is it dries very, very fast. It doesn't hold the water like cotton does. So you have to check
Check all the time to see if your paper's wet enough. Especially want a nice dark blue by the grain elevator and a few little clouds. So that's your easiest sky to do, and it will look a lot better as it starts to dry. It lightens up a little bit. Your clouds look a bit more fluffy as it starts to dry, and it'll be more sky-like too. Now, if you are a little bit more advanced at painting, or you want a different look to your painting, we're going to have that sort of pinkish hue at the bottom of the sky and fading up into the cerulean at the top. So again, I have to wet first, and this time I'm going to wet everything except the grain elevator, because this is the way I did it originally. And then I thought, I don't know if that's too much for some people, especially beginners, to work with. I'm going to wet the foreground, the sky. And I'll do this again. This is just the stage where I'd like you to watch, and then I'll do it again with you. But I think if you don't know where you're going, before you go there, you don't know how to get there, if you understand what I mean. Right, I'm going to mix a lovely sort of pinky beige color. I'm going to get some either raw sienna or yellow ochre. Either one is fine. And some permanent rose. Where did that go? There it is. So I'm mixing that with the rose. So I get just a very gentle rosy color, really gentle. And I'm going to add a little bit of water to that. And that's going to go, I need a little bit more yellow ochre with that. I don't want it too pink. I wanted that sort of orangey pink. That's going to go at the bottom of the sky. I'm going to put that on first, because if you put it on second, you get gray as it mixes with the blue. That needs to go on first. And I'm going to get that same cerulean blue I did the other sky with, not too much water. And I'm going to do the same thing. Can you see? Oh, I just remembered to check my camera. There you go. And I'm going to leave a few little clouds, a few little white spaces, but never around the grain elevator. It needs to have a nice blue border so the white stands out. And as I come down to the pinky color, I can't paint the two together, or I get gray, or I can get a little bit of gray if I want, but if you're put a bit too much there, you're going to have too much gray. And what you want is pink fading into blue, which looks rather pretty. Now, at the same time, I'm going to get my gamboge for the field, which is that orangey yellow, and I'm going to put that all in at the same time. So I've got all this wet in wet happening all together. And it doesn't matter if it blends with the pink. And even if you do that with the blue, it doesn't matter if it blends with the blue, because what you get is the green for the trees that are going to be there. So if this little bit of yellow blends with the blue, then you just get some trees in the background, which is fine. And I can put that on, even though this is kind of, I can push it up into the trees here even for the first layer. Now that gamboge is just, it's just an orangey yellow, a bit more orange. This is the gamboge I'm showing you here. And this is my usual azo yellow beside it, which the azo yellow is like a cadmium yellow or permanent yellow or a Hansa yellow. And the gamboge is just a bit more orangey. If you don't have gamboge or new gamboge, you can make one by getting your cadmium yellow or whatever you have that's a bright yellow, and add a little bit of cadmium red to it. That gets you almost exactly to Gamboge. You could add, let's put some more yellow here. You could add a little bit of permanent rose to it. A bit too much. That gets you very close to Gamboge. You've still got a bit too much rose, a little bit less. Or you can add a little bit of some orange to it, whatever orange you have. I have a couple of oranges. I have transparent orange. So add a little bit of transparent orange to it, because then I still have a transparent color. Now, they are all so similar to Gamboge that it doesn't matter if you don't have Gamboge. In fact, this one with a little bit of transparent orange is even nicer than Gamboge. So don't worry about having the same colors as me. I'll put this one on here just to show you. This is the one I just made with azo yellow and transparent orange. Really, all you want is a nice, bright field of wheat to complement the blue sky. So those are the two easier skies to do. And then there's a third sky, which is more of just a deep blue sky. And you start the same way. You start by, and I prefer this sky when you've got the big close-up grain elevator, because you don't need anything too fussy in the background, I don't think, with a big close-up one. You just need a very plain background. So again, I'm going to wet all of the background. And you can wet the field as well, because you're going to put that orangey yellow in for the first color of the wheat field. You have to be a little bit careful when you're wetting so that you don't get any water on the grain elevator. If you do get water on the grain elevator or paint, have a Kleenex ready to really get it off of there so you don't get a line going over that nice sharp white border. And again, it's really good to let the water sink in for a minute or so, especially if you have cotton paper. And it's much easier to paint a sky if your paper is wet. Trying to paint a sky on dry paper will give you a big streaky sky. I'll show you after this one how difficult that is. Right, now for this one, I want two blues. I want Ultramarine Blue and a little bit of Phthalo Blue. So Ultramarine is a warm blue, has sort of a reddish tint to it. And Phthalo Blue is very cool, has more of a greenish tint. So I want a little bit of that. Not too greenish. I want some warmth in that summer sky. And this is my cheap paper. I'm just going to test that there and see if I like it. And then I got to test it on dry. Need to test it on wet. It will dilute it a bit if it's wet. Might need to dilute it down a little bit more. I need a fairly big brush to do this in one go. And you're going to go from one side to the other. And then load your brush again and go one side to the other. Now this cheap paper makes life very difficult because it doesn't stay wet evenly. So I'm going to struggle with this. And that's the thing, if you use cheap paper, you're really going to struggle. The cotton paper stays evenly wet and gives you lots of time to work without worrying that you're going to start drying off and getting streaks. What you don't want is any streaks. And try and go, I have to go down the side of the grain elevator to get a crisp line, but I want to go horizontally side to side most of the time. And your goal is to try and get this all on in one go without seeing your brush strokes at any point. And then don't go back over it. Don't go and wet it again. Don't think, oh, I can see streaks or I need more color. I'll put some more paint on, because you're going to get brush strokes. You're going to get streaks. You're going to get the paint lifting off, and it won't dry flat. And if you have cheap paper like the cheap paper I'm working on, it won't dry as flat as if you have lovely cotton paper. I'm going to show you how hard it is to do that on dry paper. It really is difficult to keep your wash wet enough to work on dry paper. You will struggle because it will start to dry before you can get the next brush stroke down. And getting the consistency of paint is really tricky too. So I'm getting a very watery paint, and I quite often just tilt my board a little bit so it doesn't run back, but I can't do that at the moment. And again, you have to go one side to the other and lift. Sorry, I didn't mean lift, I meant load. Load your brush every few brush strokes. So you've always got lots of wet paint on your brush. And go next to that last brush stroke you just did. Really difficult when you have something dry in the middle. And I'm struggling now. Struggling to get this on this dry paper without brush strokes. And you have to work really, really fast if your paper's dry, because see what happened up here? This brush stroke dried before I had time to get the next brush stroke down. And that's going to give me a big dry line right there. And because I'm doing two sides of this grain elevator, one side is going to dry before I've had time to get the paint on the other side. And so I'm going to get right here dry brush strokes. And if I go back over it, then I'm going to get wet brush strokes. And it's all going to look a big mess. And that's how hard it is to work on dry paper. You have to be extremely skilled at getting a wash down. You have to have 100% cotton paper so it stays wet a long time. And you have to be extremely fast and disciplined with your brush. So I don't recommend it, because you can see I've got this big dry streak, I've got this big wet streak, I've got a corner here where it's not sharp enough. If I put the paint on now, it's all going to stand out against the drying paint. It's just going to be a horrible mess. Whereas if you've wet the paper first, it gives you a lot more time to work. So that's the part of just watching. Now we're going to do one for real. And I'm so thrilled to go back to good paper. This is not bad. This is my Canson XL. Not bad, but very tough to do a good wash on. So I'm going to start again with the landscape one. And now it's time you can join in. Now you've had a little watch. You can decide which one do you want to do. Do you want to do the cerulean? Do you want to do the cerulean blue? Just a few fluffy clouds. And if you put the yellow Gamboge in, or bright yellow in, this actually bled up into my blue sky and gave this kind of lovely glow here. So you don't even have to do the other one here where you put the pink on first. You could just put the yellow on and it might bleed up into your blue sky. Or do you want to do the warmer plain sky? So you decide what one you want to do. It doesn't have to be on a particular one. I'll start with this one, just a pretty simple cerulean blue one. Cerulean blue is lovely. It doesn't stain the paper, so it's a good one to use. And I want to put, for the people who aren't here but will watch the video, this, I just want to put what paper this is. Cold press, and I think this is 5 inch by 7 inch, this one. I'll just write it down there for people. I zoom out. Right, so I'm going to wet the paper again. Clean water. I've got 4 buckets of water, so 3 are already dirty. And I'm going to wet carefully around the grain elevator. I kind of drag my brush sideways. If I want a nice straight line, I push it down on the paper and drag it sideways. This time I'm going to wet my field. I'm going to put the yellow in after I do the blue, the Gamboge or whatever color you want to put in there. You can just put yellow. You can just put cadmium yellow. It's just our first layer. We're going to come back with more colors on top. And I do hope you have some cotton paper that is going to be easier for you to work with. Because if you're feeling frustrated about your painting, it's probably not you, it's probably the paper. And I usually I tip, oh, I've got a huge base in the middle there that's not wet. That's why you tip it. Then you can see if there's any spots that aren't shiny. And I just saw a huge, huge spot in the middle there. That was dry still. So make sure I haven't quite got the angles on the top there. And I'm going to grab a Kleenex and I'm just going to make sure there's not too much water on the bottom or I'll get a great big run back into the painting. You can see there's a little bit too much at the bottom there, so I'm just going to, you can actually see it shining more on the camera than I can here. Right, then I need my Cerulean Blue, my sky blue color, and start at the corners. The corners need to have color in them. So it's a great place to start because you don't have to plan. You can sort of just put the color in the corners and off you go. And then when you've got a bit of color in there, don't forget, get your roof nice and straight and leave some white spaces. And because the paper's wet, you've got time to work without rushing. So make sure you get really sharp lines next to the grain elevator. And I'm taking a little paint off my brush on the cloth. And you don't, down near the horizon, the clouds get thinner. So you don't need to have thick fluffy clouds near the horizon. You can, I've got a big, you see that big dry patch? I still, even though tipping my paper and checking, I still have a dry patch here. And I'm going to use my slightly wet brush to just dampen that down a bit. The nice thing with Cerulean Blue is it's easy, it doesn't stain, it's easy to lift. And because my paper's wet, I have some time to manipulate it. I don't have to rush because everything's drying. So remember, I want to get good lines around the grain elevator, so it's nice and blue, close to that. Little tiny clouds close to the horizon. I'm dabbing off some paint from my brush so I have less paint coming down here, a little bit more next to the grain elevator. And it's still wet, so I can still put a little bit more in without worrying about getting streaky lines. It looks streaky now I've put it in, but as it dries, or if I use my slightly wet brush, I can just manipulate it a little bit because my paint and my paper is still a little bit wet. And now I can put in the Gamboge at the bottom, or you can put in whatever yellow you like, or you can mix a lovely orangey yellow. I just wanted to go really bold with the yellow so that we have that bold wheat field color underneath the painting, which was not there in the photograph. So that's that sky. I will just do my plain blue sky on the other grain elevators, so I have both of them ready to work on. And if you were wanting to do this plain sky, then you can watch again if you want to. Again, I have to, now I've got the cotton paper, I'm not going to be struggling like I was struggling before, but I still need to make sure everything except the grain elevator is wet and properly wet, not just a little, not just a dab of wet. This water has got to be able to soak into the cotton paper and keep it wet while I paint, so I have time to get everything painted. I'm going to have to turn this one. It's too big to do at an angle. And that's the thing, when you're painting at home and you don't have to be on a camera like I am, you can turn your board any direction you want to make it easier to paint for you. You don't have to paint with the picture up the right way, because often that's really, really difficult. And I want to make sure that I don't have too much water at the bottom here. Don't want to run back. And I've lifted it. I've got a dry spot at the side. Dry spots are really annoying. You should like lift it this way and that way and check that you have no dry spots, because they really stand out when everything else is wet. So again, I'm going to mix the Ultramarine Blue and a little bit of the Phthalo Blue for the nice bright summer sky. And side to side, a bit more Phthalo Blue maybe. Side to side. Try not to go over your brush strokes. And of course, I got to be careful not to go over the grain elevator. Oops, I almost did there. And of course, I've got Phthalo Blue in the mix. So Phthalo Blue is a staining color, so it's quite difficult to wash off if you do have a little accident with it and go over the edge. I'm taking the paint off of my brush as I get closer to the where the trees are going to be. And again, I'm going to have to turn my board. I can't get that sky on with my arm over the top of the paper. Got to try and do a horizontal movement most of the time. And take a bit of a paint off as I get down to the where the trees are going to be. Tidy up that edge. Now, I did go over the edge of the roof, but it's going to be dark gray, so I don't think that's going to matter. And I have white paint that I can fix any little mistakes at the end. You have to let that soak in. It always looks a little bit patchy when it's wet, but once it all soaks in, it's usually pretty good. And now I'm going to get the Gamboge. Make sure I've got a really clean brush and really clean water. That's why I've got 4 pots of water here. And I'm going to put the Gamboge again going side to side. And I'm just going to let it meet the blue where the green trees are going to be. It will probably just fuzz up a little bit into the blue, which will be great. It'll make a lovely kind of a green transition or a nice yellow glow to the sky, one or the other. And then that one is, I'm going to just clean up any paint or water from the edges, because that can run back and make a puddle in your wash. Many annoying things that watercolor can do, lots and lots of them. It's very, very good at being annoying. Don't ever think it's you, it's the paint and the paper and the nature of the medium. There we go. So that one is on. And you can see that the paper is still shiny. still wet. So that's the difference between the cotton paper, which keeps the wet a long time, and the student paper, which would be dry by now and a real struggle to paint on. So let me, I'm just going to look at my first one that I just did. Put this one to one side. And I feel that the Gamboge, because the paper was quite wet, my Gamboge doesn't look very strong. So before I move on to the triads, I'm going to do another layer on that drying paper of Gamboge because I want it to be really nice and bright. We're going to put some burnt sienna and raw sienna over the top. So we want a nice bright color underneath, and mine looks a little bit washed out. So let's put a little bit more. We're going to have green trees between the blue and the yellow, so I'm not worrying about that transition too much. Yeah, and then I'm going to put, and I'm just going to have a little talk about burnt sienna because it's an interesting color. I tested a few burnt siennas. I have some, and I have some dot charts, and I've always bought Winsor & Newton's burnt sienna because I like that one. And when I was doing all the research on paints recently, I found out that they use a completely different formula for their burnt sienna. They use pigment red 101 for the Winsor & Newton's burnt sienna, and it's not as brown as some of the other ones and not as granulating. So Daniel Smith uses pigment brown 7 for their burnt sienna, and it's quite a reddy brown. M. Graham uses pigment brown 7, and again, it's quite a deep brown. And then the Van Gogh student paints, they use the same as Winsor & Newton, the pigment red 101. So these are my favorites. I just like the more transparent reddy color of those. In Daniel Smith, if you get the red iron oxide, that is the same. That's PR 101, the same as burnt sienna. So it's a tricky road to navigate all these colors. And I will be using today the Winsor & Newton burnt sienna. That's the one I like. So that's why I say it can kind of take the place of a red because it's made with a red pigment. And of course, the sienna is an earth pigment. It comes from Siena in Italy originally, and hundreds of years old, and they used to do lots of painting with the sienna, and they burnt means as in fired. It's a clay, and they would fire the clay and then grind it up, and that's what gave it that color. And because it is iron oxide in the clay, makes it that red color, and they used it for quite red paintings, actually quite red parts of paintings. So it's acting as the red in like a primary triad today. I'm going to start with the lightest color because they tend to get, the water gets dirty, and I'm going to use my new Gamboge. Now, why it's called new Gamboge is the old Gamboge faded really easily, and no artist today like paints that are going to fade easily, because it means that if you do actually want to keep a painting for over 100 years, the color disappears. Van Gogh's paintings, all of his colors have faded, all of his reds have faded. So where he painted purple before by mixing, he mixed a blue and a red, now all the red has faded, so now his paintings look blue that used to be purple. So he used to do a lot of purple and yellow to use complementary colors, and now they're blue and yellow. And some paintings he did of blossoms that were beautiful pink blossoms are now white blossoms because the pinks and reds he used have all faded, which is a real shame. So new Gamboge is a new mix that doesn't fade like the old Gamboge faded. So this one is a mixture of red 209 and yellow 150. So that's why you can make a Gamboge by mixing a red and a yellow. That's all the manufacturers do. So mine is by M. Graham. I love M. Graham paints. They have honey in their paints. And I'm going to paint it on fairly strong in my little bubble. And you can always use this instead of an orange. It's actually rather nicer than an orange, very orangey yellow. And the Burnt Sienna, let's get my Winsor & Newton one. I have all the Burnt Siennas. I have the M. Graham and the Daniel Smith, because sometimes the art store doesn't have the one I want and I just have to buy something else. And then I'm never happy with it. So this is the Winsor & Newton Red 101. And the brown pigment, the brown 7, granulates a lot. And somebody asked me the other day in class, what does granulate mean? So I don't know if all of you know what granulate means. It means that the particles of the pigment are quite large, so that as the paint dries, you tend to see lots of grains on your paper. You get a grainy look. And it's called granulation. And there's nothing you can do to avoid that except use a different color. And ultramarine blue is also a granulating color, which means that the particles of pigment are quite big. They float on the surface quite a lot, so it's very, very easy to lift. It doesn't stain, which is another good thing to know, because sometimes you don't want your paint to stain if you want to lift it off. And it's a workhorse blue. You can use ultramarine blue for pretty much everything. It's a really, really good blue to have in your palette. So there's the ultramarine blue. There's our 3 colors of our triad today. And remember what we did last week? You're going to start with the lightest one, which is the Gamboge, and you're going to mix a tiny, I don't know which one's my Gamboge now, that's me here. Going to mix a tiny, tiny bit of ultramarine blue with that to make a very, very, very yellowy green. And because it's got red in it, you're going to get an olive green. You're not going to get, see this PR 209, that's pigment red 209. So if you mix red and yellow and blue, you start to get the more muddy gray colors. But if you want a lovely olive green, then that's a beautiful mix to have. Going to add a little bit more ultramarine blue to that for the middle one. When you're mixing the blue with the yellow, you have to do such a tiny bit of blue, because it makes it so strong with just the tiniest bit. I'm trying to get the right amount for the middle bubble here. It's still pretty dark. That's our kind of our mid green, and then you can mix a bit more blue in with that to get a nice dark green. Now these greens are lovely for foliage, because foliage isn't always bright spring greens. You might have lots of these more muted greens, especially in the shadow of foliage. So like I said, you really don't need to buy a tube of green, hardly ever, because pretty much all of these yellows and blues will make you a big variety of greens. And I forgot what I like to do, and I forgot again, is I like to do the diluted version. That's kind of like the full strength version. And then of course diluted is a little bit lighter. That's how you can get lighter colors. Don't mix white with them, you just mix some water with them. Now we're going to go up this side, starting with the Gamboge again, but this time I'm going to add a little bit of Burnt Sienna in there. When I remember where it is, there it is. So you're mixing a red with a red and a yellow, so you're not going to get any surprises here. You're just going to get some lovely burnt oranges. And I don't buy orange paint because I don't think it's needed. I do have a couple on my palette just because one came in a box with other paints, and one I bought because somebody wanted to know what cadmium orange looked like, and I bought it, and I've never used it because I prefer all of these mixes to a tube of cadmium orange. I find cadmium orange very, very opaque and unnatural looking. And all of these beautiful oranges you can make with your other colors so much more lovely. A little bit more. The thing I like about the Winsor Newton Burnt Sienna is it's much more transparent than the brown pigment one. But maybe the brown one is more traditional, so I don't know. I don't think it really matters as long as you like the paint that you've got. A little bit of dilution. And then if I'm coming down this side, I'm going to start with the burnt sienna because it's easier to mix a tiny bit of blue in with the burnt sienna than vice versa. And I've run out of palettes. I'm going to have to clean up a palette. I don't very often clean my palettes when I'm painting because I can use all the colors in them, but when I'm doing this with you, I definitely need some clean spots here. Clean those up and start with my burnt sienna. And then add a little tiny bit of blue. Just a tiny bit. And that goes up next to the burnt sienna. And you'll notice that just a tiny bit of blue mixed with your burnt sienna gives you a lovely brown. And again, you really don't need to buy any other browns apart from burnt sienna because you can mix any blue with it to make a brown and get beautiful browns. And mix a little bit more blue with it. You gotta really, this one's very similar to sepia. And when you mix blue with a color, it's called cooling it down because blue is a cool color. So as you add blue to this warm orangey brown, you're cooling it down, and you'll get cooler and cooler browns as you do that. So it's a nice brown, and then lots of blue in it. The last one. And you can get some beautiful, beautiful grays as you get right down to the heavy blue mixes. You've got black and gray happening. So useful. These two colors, the ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna, incredibly useful. I don't think I could paint without them. I think they're absolutely vital. I've got my really, really dark gray. Oh. Again, I forgot to. So you can see if I add some water to this gray, it's a beautiful color. I forgot to dilute the other two. Let's do that again. Where's my pen? This one will do. So down here, we're going to do our neutrals. So we're going to try and make the first square equal amounts of each of the three pigments. And then we're going to try and go for about just about 70% blue, just about. This one we're going to go for about 70% brown or red. Call that our red pigment. And this one we're going to go for about 70% yellow, or the Gamboge. It's just an approximate mixture. It just means that you've got a lot more of one pigment than the other. And of course, there's a huge range that you can mix with 3 pigments, just a huge range. And even I'm going to wet just a little bit of this square so you can have a diluted end here. Even if you dilute these, you get a wide range of colors. So to mix equal amounts, I'm going to sort of get an equal amount on my brush. So I'll start with the Gamboge because it's the easiest to contaminate, the Gamboge, and then similar amount of Burnt Sienna, and then similar amount of Ultramarine Blue. We will put that in the equal amount box. Got a very, very deep, like khaki brown green color. And then I'm going to dilute it out a little bit with some water. See what it looks like as it gets a bit lighter. Again, this is very cheap paper in this little book, so it's not as nice as it would look on good watercolor paper, where you'd get a nicer transition. I think the neutral colors are really exciting colors, all these lovely, beautiful, rich darks and greens, and really colors you can't buy. I've never seen them in a tube, half these colors. Right, so now we want one that's about 70% blue. So we'll start with the other 2 first. Tiny bit of Gamboge, so like the tip of my brush in the Gamboge, and the tip of my brush in the Burnt Sienna. We've got to get enough to actually fill the square. And then a big brush full of ultramarine. And let's try that one out. Now this is almost black. It's a very blue black, but again, I think it's a really exciting color. Beautiful, beautiful dark. And if you dilute that out, a lovely, lovely, cool gray. Of course, it's a cool gray because it is mostly blue. And rather gorgeous. And that's how we're going to make a nice dark gray for the roof of the grain elevator that we're painting. So now I want one that's mostly brown. Oh, I'll get the yellow and the tiny touch of blue, just a little tiny touch of those, and then a big brush full of brown. And sometimes I've got to go back and forth a little bit because it's difficult to pick up the right amount for one square. A little bit of blue and a big brush of brown. There we go. And we're going to have a very sort of yellowish brown. Let's dilute it out. And the last one is going to be mostly yellow. So if we use mostly yellow, we're going to get something very close to a raw sienna or something like that. If you don't have a raw sienna, you can always mix these colors and have a yellow, dominant with a couple of the other colors. You'll get something close to a raw sienna. So let's think burnt sienna. I just think what I'm doing. Got to be mostly yellow. So we start with some burnt sienna and a tiny bit of ultramarine, too much ultramarine. And then quite a lot of yellow. So it's sort of again, a sort of a dirtied up yellow, not really bright, but not really dull either. And I'm just going to dilute that out. Kind of a nice color for straw and shadows in straw. Shadows on a beach if you wanted shadows. Dilute that out there. And this is just for sort of basic ones. Imagine how many you can mix if you vary those proportions and play with them. I love ultramarine and burnt sienna for mixing, just a huge variety of grays. And if you add a little bit of red to them, blacks that are incredible and very exciting. Zoom out a little bit. And that's I'm going. So you can see how much everything fades as it dries. I put quite a lot of yellow on this wheat field. And remember, I came back and I put a bit more yellow on this one because I wanted it nice and bright. So there's one more place I actually forgot to put the yellow on the pool sign, but that's okay because we're going to do a bit of work on the field and we can do that now. It's really kind of nice how the pool sign echoes the yellow field and complements the sky. And I didn't make it the really shadowed color that it is in the photograph. It's a very shadowed sign. You can if you want. I kind of just like it with the orange showing. So I'm going to get my little number 2 brush and I'm going to start with some Gamboge, and on the dry paper I'm just going to put that Gamboge in over the sign here. That will be dry. By the time we come to do the shadow on that side, it will be dry. I'm not going to worry too much about the lettering at this point. We're going to paint right over it. If you're doing the small painting, you can actually use a small pen, like this is a 005 Pigma pen. You can use that at the end to put in some of the lettering because it's pretty tiny and quite difficult to do with a brush. And also the lettering is on an angle because of the perspective. So it's tricky. So just leave it and do it with a pen if you find it too much. So I've got that little pool sign in. Now I want to do a bit more to give the field some depth and color. And I'm working on dry paper, but I'm going to work with quite a wet wash. On the left side here, I am going to put some raw sienna. And on the right side here, I'm going to put some burnt sienna. And I'm just going to wash that in with a wet brush. So raw sienna, earth color, again from the sienna in Italy. And this was the clay before, it's called raw because this is the raw clay before they fired it. So it was a more yellowy color. Of course, now it's just chemicals. There's no clay in it now, it's just chemicals. And I'm going to put that on the left-hand side, back and forth a little bit with my brush and coming up against the grain elevator. So it's going to cause a little bit of shadow there. And then I'm going to take a wet brush and just gently ease those brush strokes in so they're not so hard.
Caroline, are you still using the 2 brush for what you just did?
Oh, sorry, Carolyn. No, I should have said I've switched to a number 8 now because I want my brush bigger. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, I just used the number 2 brush or number 1 to do that little sign because it's tiny. Thank you for reminding me. I usually save when I've switched brush. So a number 8 is good, or even a number 10. You want a brush that's good for doing a wash without being too fiddly. Now I need my burnt sienna for the other side. I'm going to get my burnt sienna. And I'm going to sweep that in from the right corner. It's really good to have corners covered with color. And again, I'm going to wet my brush, tap a little bit of the water off, and use my wet brush to just pull those brush strokes in and blend them a little bit. If you feel that your field is not yellow enough, if you think, oh, it went really, really pale, then you can always put some more Gamboge on as well and let it blend into these colors, wet in wet. And the idea is to get you don't want a flat wash like you're trying to aim for with the sky. The idea is to have this more like a watercolor, where you have your colors mixing wet in wet and more painterly, sort of, you know, washes here and there mixing with each other. Don't overdo it, but make sure that you have a bit more color on there. I will do my other one while you're working on that. I'll just get my other one, because the other one is the same. I need to go to my little tiny brush for the pool sign. And fill that in carefully. And then switch back to my number 8 brush and do the same thing I did for the other one. Get my raw sienna and put that on the left-hand side, back and forth horizontally. And I put some more Gamboge on this. I think this is okay for Gamboge. And I got my burnt sienna and come in from this side. Wet my brush and just pull that in and out with a wet brush. This was not in the photo. This is totally made up to represent the idea of wheat fields. That's all it is. So I can do whatever I like. And I just want to pull the painting forward right here on the right hand side. So I've got a lovely warm color, and I want to have a little bit of shadow under the grain elevator. So I put that on the left, and then the Gamboge is kind of glowing through underneath those colors. I think the Gamboge just on its own is too flat and too bright. So these are just sort of bringing it down a notch, but you can still see it glowing through from behind. And where my blue and my yellow mixed, I like that glow back here. I'm going to put the dark trees in there too. I'm going to use our green mix for that. I've got to check my notes to make sure I make the right mix. So we can, I've said use azo yellow, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, but you can use the Gamboge if you want to. It doesn't matter which yellow you use. I'm gonna stick with the Gamboge just for continuity. And bring this one back. I've got, because of course we can mix some lovely greens with these. So I've got the Gamboge and the burnt sienna here. And I'm going to mix a bit of ultramarine in with them until I get a dark green. And that will do. Or if you feel that that green's a little bit too khaki, a little bit too dull, you can use your cadmium yellow to mix a dark green. But the bushes in the background are pretty tiny and not particularly important. to the whole composition. I'm adding just a little bit more ultramarine to that. I want it a tiny bit darker. I have switched to my number 4 brush, and I'm just putting in these, and I have to be really careful I don't leave my hand in my wet paint. I'm putting in these scrubby little trees back here, using the point of my number 4 brush to poke those trees up, and then coming down and filling in the bottom. Don't make them all the same height. Vary them a little bit. They're not very tall. There's a very small amount of greenery there, but it just kind of gives a nice border between the ground and the sky. And again, I have to be really careful not to lean my, and you too, your wrist in this wet paint. Let's put some in here. This can be quite a dark green. I have quite a bit of ultramarine in this. Some of these trees are very thin. You don't have to be very precise with them. Just poke your brush up, point first, and try not to make them all the same height, because that will look a little too regimented, too unnatural. And come up against the side of the grain elevator so you give it a nice sharp dry edge there. The other thing that I do with the green is I get a little bit on my brush and I'm going to pull it. I'm not going to overtake all of the yellow I've put in. I'm going to go back and forth and put just a little bit of greenery here. What it does is it just kind of grounds the elevator into the ground. And there was a track here, I guess, that the trucks and things drive along. You can sort of indicate that with the green. You don't have to be very precise, but it gives that border between the sky and the ground and gives the elevator something to sit on. I'm going to do this one too, because I know you're painting with me, so you're catching up. So I know give you more time if I do both of them. Just use the point of your brush, really fill it well with paint. The nice thing, I use these silver black velvet brushes because they hold a lot of paint. They're squirrel mixed with man-made hair. I had one of them for 25 years. They really last. They have beautiful points, but they hold a lot of paint. And it's kind of, for the calligraphers that have joined us, it's like a really good pen when you dip it, and it will hold a lot of ink for a long time. It's the same with these lovely brushes. If they can hold a lot of paint, it means you don't have to keep dipping. You can paint loads with just one dip in your paint and not run out, which is so useful. Then you don't get awful dry lines and things like that. I was so happy. Our local iron oxide art store sells the silver black velvet now. There used to be only one store in Canada, which was I think it was in Edmonton, that I had to order them from, and the shipping was really expensive. But I paid it because I loved them. And now, because Willow at Iron Oxide will order in pretty much anything you ask for, she's got loads of silver black velvet brushes now, which is actually quite dangerous, because I go down there and see one I haven't got and don't need, but buy it anyway. And a little bit of green underneath the grain elevator to just give some shadow. Oh, I've got the green on both of them. I've got the pool sign on both of them. I'll continue to keep switching back and forth, but you can work on whatever one you want. The paint colors are the same, no matter whether you've got the portrait or the landscape version. The portrait one's just a little bit bigger for you to see if I work on this one. The next thing I want to do is all of the very dark gray roofs and windows and things that are dark gray. Now the sky should be dry. Make sure your sky is dry enough that it's not going to bleed when you put in all of the dark gray roofs and those areas. Now you don't have to use the colors I've suggested. You can use whatever you've got. I've made a cooler blue, Phthalo Blue and Burnt Sienna shadow, but you don't have to. You can use Burnt Sienna and Ultramarine Blue. They will make a beautiful shadow color, or whatever blue and Burnt Sienna or blue and brown you have. Today I'm going to stick with Ultramarine Blue and Burnt Sienna, because that will make a lovely dark color for the roofs. If I want it good and dark, I want to have a lot of blue in there. So here's my mix right here. That was Ultramarine Blue with a bit of Burnt Sienna added. I've got something that looks incredibly similar to Payne's Grey, which is not surprising since they usually use Ultramarine Blue in Payne's Grey. I'm going to switch to my number 2 brush again. These are going to be little tiny areas that I'm painting. And I'm going to, all of the foreground is wet, and I don't want to lean my wrist in it, and I want to get a good straight line on this roof. So I want to have control by turning my paper upside down. And this is the one where I went over the edge a bit with the blue sky, so I can do a little bit of fixing right now on that by using this dark gray. So this was just the ultramarine and the burnt sienna, and you want a lot more ultramarine than burnt sienna to make it this dark. There's some kind of thing sticking out the end here. Any of you who are from Saskatchewan, you probably know a lot more about grain elevators than I do. I did take the picture of this one, and I went inside one. There was an art gallery inside one of them that we went to somewhere. I've been inside them, but I don't know much about the whole workings of them. So, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong about something. And I'm sure this one used to stand more in a field rather than on the side of the road where they were building, I think, holiday cottages. Probably will get moved somewhere. I hope they do save some of them and don't sort of tear them all down. It would be such a shame to lose them all. I'm painting with the same dark gray mix. I'm painting in the windows. Now I'm not going to do any on the shadow side because we have to put shadow on there before painting any of these details in. Because I can turn it back up the other way. You're probably feeling all upside down with me, having it up that way. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to grab a Kleenex. I'm just going to put a Kleenex just here. It's almost dry, just so my hand doesn't smudge it all. And there's a dark gray roof coming down here. Again, if you want a straight line, it helps to pull your brush towards you. It makes it easier. And lean your hand on the table. If you lift your hand up, you can't control your brush. So make sure your hand's leaning on the table, and pulling the brush towards you gives you a much easier way to make a straight line. Get a little window in here. All of these details are just on dry paper, which makes it much, much easier to paint. This little sort of door up here is not, it's not a hole, it's a door. So you don't actually see black there. Just going to put the border in this. And I'm going to put an edge to this. I've got this roof to do as well. There's lots of details you can do right at the end of a painting that just sort of picks everything up to put those details in at the end. Do this roof. And the bigger your painting, the more detail you can put in, the more color changes you can put in. But these are just little studies. We couldn't finish a big painting in this amount of time. And if there's a few of you new to my classes. If you're new to my classes, the reason I do little studies is so we can do more paintings in the 8 weeks. And that way you learn more things because there's more problems to tackle and colors to mix, and you just get a broader range of things that you learn, but we don't actually get to do a very big painting. So the little door here, I have a wet, all I have right now is I've washed my brush. I have a ugly looking sponge here covered in paint, which I just kind of dab off some of the water on my brush. And with that just wet brush, I'm going to make that paint bleed into this little doorway here so that it's that kind of light gray shadowed color. So it's not quite so white. Same thing with this. I'm just diluting that gray a little bit and taking that down this edge here. If you've done a really little tiny grain elevator, you can also put black pen around all of this when you're finished if you want to sharpen all the lines up and get them all looking a bit more like a building. And also things like the, this is my 02 pen. Right here is a power pole. And I'm fine, this is a waterproof pen, so I'm fine to use it on here. There's a power pole with some power lines here. They're kind of a really fun thing to put in, but much easier to put in with a pen than with a paintbrush. Just putting those in to show you what you can do with a pen for finishing details or to get extra little things in. Things like power poles are very industrial, but they kind of say this is human. This is human habitation. This place. There's just those little details that kind of make a painting. I think anyway. That's just my opinion, I guess. Right. So we've got all those in. What I'd like to put in is the brown doors here, and then we're going to do some of the shadows. So for the brown doors, same colors, the burnt sienna. I'll bring my tray over, sorry. I'm getting some of the burnt sienna. Then I'm going to add a little bit of this gray to it, just to make the doors a little bit of a darker brown. We can put some shadow on them when they're dry if we want to give them a bit more shadow. So I'm going to put a little bit more burnt sienna and just make them a little bit more brown. Put those in here. Little brush again, I've just got my number 2 brush. And there are some brown doors on this side too, but I want to do all of the shading on this side before we put those in. Also the some of the framework around here is dark brown. And put that in. And what I want to do while that paint is wet, I'm going to do a little bit of lifting. Get my number 4 brush, wet it. And I'm just going to use it to lift a little bit of color off the doors a little bit so that they have some dark and shade to them. light and shade rather. Just so it's not so, quite so dense a color. You can do that anytime you put a dark color on. Before it's dry, you can lift a little bit of the paint off so you get a bit of variety of color. My trees are drying very, very light too. I might want to put another layer on those too when I'm done. Now I'm going to, I think you're probably just catching up, so I can probably work on this one while you're catching up. My little teeny weeny brush, this is even smaller, this little one, so I needed either a number 2 or a number 1 brush. You have to be very careful and controlled with your brush. Use just the point for the thin lines. And a little bit more paint, mixing up a little bit more color. And don't worry about mixing the same color again either. Everything changes color in light and shade, so it will look different. A window here. Roof here. Did I do the roof on the other one? Oh yes, I did. I had to go check. I hadn't forgotten a roof on this little one. Border, window. I think this was the one I nearly forgot, wasn't it? This one here. This roof looks kind of weird. I've lost my drawing here somewhere along the way. Well, we won't worry about it. A roof down here. And a shadow down here. Wet brush to make a bit of a shadow in here. That little door. And then some brown doors right here. Put those in. And I'm going to use my little very thin 0.05 pen to put the holes in. There's a sign here too. Wires. A little bit of brown on the back of the sign, just there. A pen on there. Right. So we've got all those basic things in. Now we're going to do something that's quite intimidating. I've got water on this guy. And that is to put the shadow side in on the grain elevator. And watercolor dries lighter. So it's going to seem, as you put it on, it's going to seem like it's too dark. But you need to have faith that it will be fine when it's dry. And it needs to be fairly dark on the shadow side, darker than your sky, and it will make the lighter side look really, really light if you have a good dark shadow. So again, we're going to use the Ultramarine Blue and the Burnt Sienna, that good old workhorse color, but very heavy on the blue because we want our shadow to be quite blue, but not bright blue. We want it to be we don't want it brown either. We want it to be a nice gray blue. And always test your color. She said with no paper handy to test the color on. I'll grab my, oh, I had a book, didn't I, somewhere? I don't know where anything goes. Here we go. That's we got this one here. I'm just going to test it on this one. I need a little bit more blue with it. I don't want it to be too brown. And then I want to check it against this one. So I want to have this one beside it. Remember, this is going to dry a little bit lighter. So if you feel your color is too dark, add a little bit more water, but make sure it's blue enough. Don't put brown on the side of the shaded side of this. And remember, it's going to dry a lot lighter than it looks when you put it on. And that's why it's kind of intimidating, because as you put it on, you think this is going to be too dark, but it won't be. You're going to go over everything except the pool sign. Now, if this was realistic, I'm going to put, no, I'm not, because you'll copy me, and then I was going to show you what it would look like if I put it over the pool sign. And it should really go over it, because on the photograph it was in shadow, and that would be more realistic. But I kind of like it really shining that bright Gamboge yellow. I think I'll go over the other one so you can see, and then you can decide for yourself. Do you want to have it realistic with the shadow? And you can go over the brown doors because they are in shadow. We can put brown over the top of this. We can put dark over the top of the windows. Now, if you've got your dilution right, you should be able to see all of your pencil lines through it. It shouldn't be so dark that you can't see your pencil lines. I'm just adding a little bit more paint just to the left-hand side. It's all wet, so I can do that. Now I'm going into my number 2 brush again, because I have some more shadow I have to do on this side of this little window door here. I need to put some here, and it's throwing a shadow across the roof here and across the roof here, like a triangle, and that needs to go in as well to really make this building look 3-dimensional. And that's kind of what we're trying to achieve. And while you have that color on your brush, on a tiny brush, you can start to put some of the shadows of the planks that this is built with, which of course show through the white paint, especially as these buildings are aging quite a bit. You can see these lines. You need to make sure they're going to be parallel to the way the building is facing, with the perspective lines. Like everything in this, I'm gonna get my ruler. Everything needs to be parallel to these perspective lines, all of your lines in the elevator, otherwise it's going to look strange. That's why I provide you a line drawing, because perspective is a very difficult thing to get your mind around. And if you have a building like this, you have to have the perspective correct, or it's not going to look correct. So I'm just putting with a tiny number 2 brush, just putting some of those lines on here and there. I don't want to put loads of them on, just indicating a few. And I can put a little bit more shadow down this side of the door. There's actually a shadow on the wall here from these steel sort of pipes in the middle of the doors. And the other color that makes up the planking is brown. So you can go into the door color, which was mostly burnt sienna, with a bit of ultramarine blue, just to take it. Oops, that's way too much. Ultramarine blue. So we've got a dark brown, nice warm dark brown. And underneath this door here, there's quite a lot of wear and tear. So it's quite a bit of wear of the white paint. So you can put a bit extra under there. And then here and there, you can see a more brown color in the planking. And don't overdo this, just, you know, a touch a bit here, especially in areas like definitely around this door or opening, quite a bit of wear and tear. Put that in, put a little bit more shadow on the door if you like. And under here. And the other thing that's happening is there's a shadow. Let's get my brush with the dark gray. There's a shadow thrown by the roof here. It's along here. There's a shadow thrown by the roof here. And there's some, you know, there's some extra shadows. And once this edge starts to dry, there's some, it's not quite dry enough, I shouldn't put those in. Once it starts to dry, there's some dark windows in this side too that you can put in, but it needs to be a little bit drier before I put those doors and windows in. What I do want to do is I want to, I just feel those trees are a little bit too light. I want to take a bit more of that dark green, a bit more ultramarine in it. I'll take a little bit more of that dark green. I just want to, I think I just want to darken up those trees. I feel like they're too wishy-washy, especially on the right hand side. I think the left is okay. Yeah, I just want to a bit more color in those, and maybe a little bit more under here. Those little touches of extra shadow, extra color, they're all things you can put in at the end to get lots of extra little details in. Now you can see as my shadow color is starting to dry, it's really not as dark as it looked when I first put it on. So it's always intimidating to put that paint on when it's so dark. Going along the edge here. I think I just want to warm up those doors a bit. I think I could have gone a bit warmer with these doors, a bit more burnt sienna. And of course, this needs to be dry. I need to put these brown doors in when it's dry. Let's do this other one. This time I'm going to go right over the pool sign with the shadow to make it how it would be realistically, how it was in the photo. I have a photo here somewhere. So let's look at the actual photo. And of course you can see the pool sign is bright yellow, but the shadow goes all over that side, which really dulls it right down. And the shadow on the photo is actually much darker than the shadow in my painting. I didn't want it that dark. I wanted a bit brighter. So I'm making the shadow color again, which was the ultramarine with a little bit of burnt sienna. Not too much because we want quite blue, a blue-gray shadow. Little, I want a smaller brush. Oh, I don't know, number 4 brush maybe. I don't want it too big and not too small because I want to get the paint on. Get the dilution right. The good thing is with ultramarine and burnt sienna, they don't stain. Anytime you get too much on, you can quickly lift them off again. Now this time I'm going to go right over the pool sign, so it's actually exactly like the photo. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to like it as much because I like the yellow sign glowing, but for the sake of realism, it's going in there. Now, of course, I will have to do on this side, I've got to do another bit to the roof on that side. There's got to be some extra, there's got to be some windows done. I've got to do this this side here. Do the shadow on the wall, shadow on the roof. A little bit of shadow from here and down here. Doors. Now I'm going to get my tiny brush, 000. I have to turn this so I get this line straight along the edge of the roof, along the edge of this roof. Remember, you can always turn your paper. You don't have to paint with it in a certain direction. And again, I'm going to put those little planking lines on there, the weathered look, just here and there. And a little bit of brown weathering, especially under this door. A bit more color on that door maybe. And I do think those trees are a little bit insipid too. I want to darken them up a little bit. A bit more color. And that's another thing. Everything looks dark until you put in your really dark colors, and then everything looks lighter once your really dark colors go in. And that's what makes the white side glow so well, is if you put the dark on the dark side, it makes the white glow. And the sky looks much lighter once all these dark colors are in. Then your sky looks lighter and brighter. So everything is relative, and it's hard to judge until you get everything in exactly where you need extra dark. And you can wait and make that judgment until you're nearly finished. I want a bit more dark underneath the grain elevator. That's what I want to just check the photo. See, everything was kind of dark here. It's a very dull, not very interesting photo. So what we've done is sort of taken it up a notch and made it a little bit more interesting. I'm adding a little bit more of that green for a little bit more shadow over here. Right, I'm going to pause for a minute. So we're almost there. We're almost on the home stretch. There's just a few little details to put in. There's the doors on this side. I've still got the dark brown, but of course it's got the shadow color underneath, so it will be darker than the other one. And the pool sign actually has a brown line around it. You know, you could do it with a brown pencil. You could do it with a black pen. You don't have to be that precise. I've got my little tiny 000 brush, and I'm just going to put the dark brown around the pool sign. And of course the other one's the same. And it depends just what that pool sign is too small. I got to do that with a pen, but this one's a little bit bigger. So I could, if it's a bigger one, I could do it with the brush if I am careful. But I suggest you probably are going to be much more comfortable using a pen for something like that. And even something like this metal thing here, you could use a pen for this. There's things like the little windows. There's some kind of a shoot thing here. Oh, and these have got the doors here too. Put those in. And then around the doors, there are these metal bars as well, which I'll put in with a pen, I think. That's all very tiny detail. I'm just going to look at the pool lettering. I think they were dark brown. And I think on this bigger one, I might like to use the dark brown. Now their lettering is very square. Everything's very rectangular or square, the lettering, especially the ones up here, the co-op and everything. So if you just kind of keep it fairly square, I'm going to ignore the phone. This Saskatchewan here is very, very difficult to see. So you could just put in some letters that look a little bit like an S and an N, and you can put some scribble in the middle. That's fine. And then the elbow in with my pen. These words up here are very rectangular too. It says use pool co-op. I'm going really fast. I'd go much slower if I was doing a really good one. Use pool co-op flower. And oh, I tell you what else I've forgotten here. Look at my dark gray. There's an edge to the roof here. My dark gray's gone all watery on me. I got my little brush. I'm going to get the edge of the roof in here. These windows. There's what looks like an A here. I don't know if it's a piece of metal or an A for Alberta wheat. I'm not really sure. No, it's Saskatchewan, so it's not. I don't know what that is actually. The photo is not clear enough. I'm just going to get my photo so I can look. There's some machinery here. Just kind of scribbling that in. There's some metal bars across here, and here, and here. And with a painting, you don't have to be precise about everything. It's not necessary. And of course, on this side of the elevator, there's also some lines of the planking, which you need to put in after the shadow color, so that they don't all kind of dissolve behind the shadow color. A little bit of dark gray, a little bit of brown. I'm just going to put an edge, dark edge on here and here. Just down here. Get that edge a little bit sharper. We're pretty much done. Like, you can spend, it's good to spend a bit of time at the end. I really rushed through that, but it's good to spend a bit of time, you know, with your pen or with your little paintbrush, or when it's very dry, just putting all those little details in. And I think I sent you the photo, and you can look at the photo and look carefully and see if you can make out what the details are. And if you can't make out what the details are, then just do a little bit of sort of scribble that looks that shape, because literally, if you can't see on the photo what they are, nobody's going to figure it out on your painting. And even if they've worked in a grain elevator, I don't think they're going to be too critical. One other thing that I did do on one of them, which you definitely don't have to do, but you can if you want. I'm trying to find the one that I did it on. And I don't know if I don't think it really needs it, but I put in a little bit of sort of wheat in the foreground here. And I don't really think it needs it, but if you feel that's something you would like to do, then by all means, if you think, no, I want some wheat, I've got a very long liner brush here, and you can sweep in if you want some growing here. It has that like fuzz at the top and then kind of stuff like this. But that's totally up to you. If you like doing things like that and putting in those little extra details. I'm trying to do wheat here. They have those like hairs at the top. I need my thinner brush. They're looking a bit ugly, but so you can do that if you want to at the end, or you can just leave your field nice and burnt sienna at this side and quite clear. So that's your, I've done dozens of these now. I've got them all over the place, and this one's not quite finished. And I've got another one over here, not quite finished. And I think I've got to spend some time getting them all finished up. I'll just take the, I always like taking the tape off and seeing them looking a bit cleaner. Let's zoom out a little bit. So they're not quite such a mess with the tape on. That always helps. But don't take your tape off until you're completely finished and everything is nice and dry. And, you know, spend a bit of time when it's nice and dry if you want to put in some details with the pen, or put in a little bit of extra paint or whatever you want to do, then at least leave the tape on till you're done.
I hope you enjoyed painting the grain elevator, and I hope you got a great painting now that we've finished for today. Join me again next time and we'll do another painting from Canada. See you then.